Hello, everyone. My name is Leslie Kean, and I'm here to host a really exciting, what I think is going to be a very exciting conversation with Diana Pasulka, who is with me here. For those of you who are not familiar with Diana, which I think most of you probably are, but I will tell you a little bit about her. She's a professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. And her research focuses on religion, technology, and emerging religious movements. And she's authored a number of very radically important books. One of them is American Cosmic, UFOs, Religion, and Technology. Prior to that, she wrote a book called Heaven Can Wait, Purgatory in Catholic Devotional and Popular Culture. And then after American Cosmic, she wrote another book related to UAP, which is called Encounters, Experiences with Non-Human Intelligences. And her newest book just went up for pre-sale on Amazon. It's called The Others. Let me just make sure I have this right. AI, UFOs, and the Secret Forces Guiding Human Destiny. And this book is already number one in the UFO category on Amazon, even though it's not even available yet. So I would encourage everybody to go make it even better than number one by ordering it now. It's going to be an amazing book. And Diana has a wealth of information. So I first met Diana. We first met. I remember the first call we ever had was in 2017, which was, I believe, when American Cosmic came out, which was the same year that the New York Times article came out. And I remember getting on the phone with you about your book. And of course, as an investigative reporter, I was hot to try to figure
Yeah,
out who James and Taylor D were.
that's
I
right.
wasn't in
Yeah.
public. So that was my natural instinct, and I remember anyway, it's all evolved since then, but I just remember very much our first conversation, and we've been really connected ever since then. And I
That's
just
right. Yeah.
appreciate your work so much. It has such an
Yeah.
influence on my work and on my personal development with all of this. So I just want to thank you for everything you've done and for being here and for being my friend. And everybody is going to have really learn a lot from you today. So why don't we just go right? Unless you have something you want to say initially, we can just go right to the first question and get rolling.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to say thanks, Leslie, for having me on this Reddit, and Andrea and Connor and all the people that are behind the scenes making this work. It looks great. I've enjoyed these, the one with Jacques and Hal, and it's all been really very interesting. And yeah, it was in 2017, but my book actually, American Cosmic, wasn't published until 2019. So we met while it was in press. And the things that were predicted to happen by Tyler in the book, the character in the book, basically said disclosure is going to happen. I thought it was going to happen in 10 years. I didn't realize it was going to be a process that started before my book was published. So it generally takes about a year for a book to get published when it's already finished. So yeah, so that was really amazing. And I had, before we even talked on the phone in 2017, sometimes I teach about UFO events in my classes on new religious movements, and I would use your book. So I would use your book as, basically the primer for, what is it called? Generals go on the record.
It's
So it's,
UFOs, generals, pilots, and government officials go on the record. It's a long title to
yeah,
remember. So
it's a
yeah.
great book. Yeah, and so, this is what I use for my students. Later, I'd use John Mack's a book, Abduction, but students would get, I think I'd have a lot of experiencers in my classes who did not know, and then they'd read that and they'd have these triggering events, and I stopped using that book. But your
Kind
book
of
is really
limited.
safe. Yeah.
Limited, but I remember the reason we talked earlier, and we're going to go right to this question, was I just remembered it's because I received an advance copy of your manuscript. I remember that. It was,
Okay.
before the book actually came out. So that's why we were in
Got
conversation about,
it. Got it. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, we after we've done the mutual appreciation now, and again, my appreciation to all the people in the Reddit who are sitting here in the background right now working hard to make this happen. And so let's jump into this first question. It's from somebody from our aliens, from a Reddit forum called Aliens, and from from Toxic Toy. The question is, Diana, just last week at the Soul Symposium, Diana, just last week at the Soul Symposium, you did a brand new presentation that has not been released to the public. We would love to know what you said in that talk.
Yeah, so it's always fun to do a soul presentation and to, talk to people who are at the event. Um, so this presentation it was basically about me talking about a certain source and data set that could help people who are studying UAP. Because generally UAP, people now who are just getting into it, who are scientists and so forth, that they're really looking to the nuts and bolts of it and back engineering it and things like that. So I think that a really good source for information about that, of course, is in the religious traditions. And within the religious tradition that I study, which is the history of Christianity and Catholicism, you have the sources of the apparitions of the Virgin Mary that have been in continuous existence since the early, basically the second century. And so, especially in the modern times, so I study apparitions of the modern times, and we do have data. We have photographs. We have a bunch of thousands of witness testimonies. We have the seers who see the apparition. And we have a lot of recorded data. The Catholic Church is well known for keeping excellent records of these types of events. And so while I'm not conflating them, I'm not saying the apparitions of the Virgin Mary are extraterrestrials. What I'm saying is that there is so much correlation between them that it definitely warrants further study. And I have actually talked to like Hal Puthoff and obviously Jacques Vallée has written about this too. There are people in Portugal who've accessed the Fatima archives and wrote about this in the 80s and the 90s. And they have their interpretations and so forth. So I'm not looking to make a conclusion about it. What I'm looking at is utilizing this as a data set. So I basically went through a lot of the some of the more recent apparitions, like in Garabandal, Spain, and in Fatima, which happened in Portugal in the early 20th century. And what I did at the Soul conference was I think a lot of people who are interested in UAP but aren't Catholic or aren't aware of the apparitions, it may have shocked them because here we have people levitating, we have people experiencing mind reading with this apparition, and all the things that happen in UAP events happen in these apparitions. And so when you start to look at the pattern match, it's fairly shocking. So I have a feeling that it shocked a lot of those people. There were people, I think, that were diehard Catholics that were there because it was in Italy, and it didn't shock them at all. They were like, well, yeah, it may have shocked them that I was comparing them with UAP. So in both instances, I think that it's a really worthwhile study and data set. So it's just basically offering that as this is one avenue of looking into the UAP phenomena. So that's what I talked about at Soul.
Did you draw any conclusions, or have you, Diana, drawn conclusions about, how they actually are connected? Let's say contemporary experiences that people have reported in the last 20, 30 years in relationship to the ones you're talking about from the religious record. I mean, have you drawn conclusions about what that relationship is?
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I haven't drawn conclusions. I think that we can't at this point, but I think we can move the needle of knowledge. I do have some photos actually that I used at the Soul conference, and I'm wondering if the moderators can put those up. I have one of Zeitoun Cairo, which was here we go. So this, by the way, is a Coptic church, which is one of the oldest churches in the Christian tradition, and one of the oldest is it the Orthodox Coptic Church of Christianity. People tend to think of like Roman Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy as you know the you know the longest continuous denominations of Christianity, but actually there are other, the Ethiopian church, and here we have the Coptic church. So Muslims saw this, non-believers saw this. The people who saw this apparition first, this happened in the late 1960s and it ended in 1971. And so we have a lot of photographs of it. This apparition never spoke. It was a light being that appeared on the top of this Coptic church. There were work people who saw it first and thought that it may have been a sister, like a nun, and maybe she was going to jump off the church and commit suicide. So they were basically telling her not to jump. And then there was a workman inside, I'm sorry, a janitor in the church. He said, I think this actually might be the Virgin Mary, right? And so a lot of people, they didn't know what it was. There was an anthropologist who happened to live near there, and she did an analysis of this and wrote a book about it. And so we've got a lot of data on this. The apparition never said anything, never spoke. The president of at the time, I think it was Nasser, he went on and he said, "This is something that is truly supernatural. We don't know why or how." It went on for a few years. The
Mm.
Coptic Church, basically, said, "Yeah, this looks real. We don't understand it, but we believe it's the Virgin Mary." So those are interpretations, right? So when you see something like that, it looks like, we see a lot of luminous beings with these apparitions. We see a lot of luminous beings in experiencer narratives. Even people who aren't even experiencers and see like a UFO often see luminous beings. They wish they hadn't, but they did. So, this is definitely an aspect of that. And so that's one of the things. Now, I've studied this for a long time. So I've studied Catholic apparitions, Catholic levitation. In fact, I was studying Catholic levitation at the time that I started to study UFOs. So that was something that I went to the Vatican to look at, were the levitation records of actually a saint who is said to levitate, and that's Joseph of Cupertino. And I think moderators, I have that too, if you want to. Okay, yeah. So this is Joseph of Cupertino. Um, so he is a saint in the Catholic Church who is said to have levitated. There were many saints who are said to have levitated. And the thing is about this particular saint is that he he didn't want to levitate. The church did not want him to levitate. So they would move him from house to house because people would form giant crowds. It's very much like the Virgin Mary apparitions. It's rare that the church actually wants a Marian apparition to occur because it's really hard to control. It's hard to control the crowds, the narratives. What if it's not authentic? These kinds of things. So the same thing with this man, Joseph of Cupertino, who um, who would just levitate and he had so these are some of the things that I'd known prior to studying UAP events, was that there was a almost like a field of gravity. And this is why I actually have a podcast with Hal Putoff where we talk about this, a field of gravity that surrounds these saints. And we know that because when they are said to levitate, people try to hold them down. And if these people try to hold them down, they actually get taken up with them. So it's this gravitational anomaly that happens independently of the gravitation that we're, accustomed to. I also have some photos from an apparition that happened in Spain in Garabandal. If the moderators want to put those up too, this would be the girls, the Loli and Conchita. So these are the seers. These are the girls that between 1961 and 1965, there was an apparition that occurred for thousands of times. Actually, Leslie, it's really interesting. So
Wow.
throughout these years, yeah. So these girls were 12 and 11, and there were four of them. And we can also talk about children because I saw some questions that related to why is it that children have these effects. A lot of experiencers start their experiences when they're children. And I do have some interesting information about that. So these girls were engulfed in, again, this gravitational anomaly. We can show another photo of Lolly, and the girls would together they would hear the call independently. It would be an internal call to come out that the apparition would, ask them to come out, and they would rush through the village. Here's one levitating, um, and a lot of the photos show them basically walking in unison. There's videos we had. There are videos of walking in unison at the same time. The looks on their faces would change. They would see the apparition, but no one else would see the apparition. They were subject to a lot of, things that we wouldn't do today. Like people would pinprick them and shine lights in their eyes, and do a lot of these kinds of things to them. But they would be okay. Like they would always remain healthy. Sometimes they would fall on the ground, and and people could hear like bones and things like that. Like maybe their bones would crack, because of the violence of this. But this would happen throughout the day and night at random times. And so this what I'm saying is that these events and this data we have on them, we have videos, we have witness testimonies from people who are atheist, non-Catholic, credible observers, things like that. There's also, I want to show a photo that I took from the Vatican archives, and this is from the Joseph of Cupertino manuscript. If we could look at that. So the Joseph of Cupertino manuscript is thousands and thousands and thousands of, well, it's thousands of pages, okay? And it's very large. And this is just one photo that I took. And this is a photo that's basically showing that the Pope, at the time was, this is early modern time period when they're analyzing Joseph's levitations and whether or not they happened or not. This is also a time when the Inquisition was in place. So if a person was found to be lying, terrible things could happen to them. So people would go on record, just like we have people on record today. We say these are, let's take like Ryan Graves or somebody like that. Somebody who is a fighter pilot sees an anomalous craft in the sky. He's not lying. He's a credible witness. The same kind of criteria. This is in the 1600s and the 1700s. And so, they went from town to town. The group that was tasked with figuring out if Joseph actually levitated, and hundreds and hundreds of people who were credible witnesses at the time signed their names and also signed their observations. So I have these too. So anyway, and he would also have the same type of this was described, this type of gravitational anomaly was described back then. So these are the kinds of things that I talked about at the Soul Conference.
So fascinating. And I just wanted to add to that for people who want to learn more about Joseph of Cupertino. Of course, they can they can read Diana's work, but there's this amazing book called They Flew, which I know you're familiar with, Diana, written by Carlos Eire, who's an unbelievable scholar from Yale University. It's just a fantastic book. Goes into all these details about, it's very scholarly, about Joseph and others who were documented as levitating. And I just want to make one point, Diana, that I find interesting, though. You talked about this gravitational field. I know that what precipitated the levitations for Joseph of Cupertino was his states of ecstasy. He would go into an ecstatic state, and that's what would precipitate it. But it seems like with like these children, these girls, it didn't have anything to do with their state of consciousness in the moment. Am I correct? It was just that they were
No,
somehow
no.
affected by the apparition outside of them.
No, no,
So
they
the
went
cause,
into ecstatic states.
oh,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
all did.
Oh,
Okay,
absolutely. Yeah, they went
yeah.
into a unified hive mind ecstatic state. And I think
Okay.
that's pretty key. Also, if you look at like, I often talk about Teresa of Avila, another saint who levitated and is a doctor of the church and so forth. And she went into ecstatic state when she saw the famous, what at first didn't understand. She didn't know what it was. She said it was 3 feet tall. It had an arrow with a light on the end, and then she went into an ecstatic state. So I think that even, when you talk to experiencers also, they go into different states of being before, sometimes they levitate as well. You have these gravitational anomaly events occur with those reports as well. Obviously, when pilots see these craft in the sky, they do things that that appear to defy gravity, or at least as we know it. So, perhaps this is what I'm trying to say, is that it's warranted to look at this tradition, and I'm sure there are similar traditions in other religions. This just happens to be the one I know. Um, and we can see that, this looks really interesting. It
I
looks
mean,
like a legitimate cross-cultural study.
and it's fascinating to contemplate how a state of consciousness, ecstasy, can affect the field of gravity around a person. I mean, that you know
Yeah,
what I mean? That dynamic
yeah.
is just fascinating in itself.
It's hard to say exactly what's going on. I mean, could it possibly be that this, being, is able to, create this gravity around a person, and that puts them into a state? I don't know. These are the
Right,
things that future people will figure out, future
right.
researchers.
Like Hal Puthoff and those that understand gravity and
Yeah.
physics and all of that. It's always been a really fascinating question to me.
Oh,
Anyway,
speaking may I say something, one
please.
more thing about Hal's work? So there's a group at my university that we have a new, it's called Intelligent Designs Systems, and it's a new major, and we have a group of young people, who are engineers who are on it. So every time Hal gives a talk, a podcast or something, or anytime anybody talks about the gravity of UAP and so forth, um, they all get in a group and they watch it, and then they talk among, these are young people that are, undergraduates at my university, and they talk about it. So I think that things are gonna change fast because we have a lot of very intelligent young people basically listening to everything that people like Eric Davis, people like Hal, people like Jacques, are talking about.
So fascinating, and it actually does also relate to physical mediumship and my work with physical medium Stuart Alexander, which we're gonna talk about later. I'm not gonna get into it now, but that involves levitation as well, and he's in an
Mhm.
altered state of consciousness, and so and he himself has been levitated. He sees it as happening due to forces outside of himself, but it's all interconnected in some way that is just fascinating to me. We don't really understand it. So anyway, that's a whole universe we've just covered of this mystery. So let's go on to another question. This is from HighStrangeness, MantisAwakening. I guess this is directed at me. A lot of researchers begin by studying UFOs, but eventually end up exploring spirituality. And it seems that's true for you too. What do you think? Why do you think that happens? Okay. And you can comment on this too, Diana. But I mean, for me personally, I have been involved with a spiritual search, let's put it that way, since I was in college when I discovered Zen Buddhism and I became a practicing Zen Buddhist for many years. I've never been part of any sort of conventional religion like Catholicism, or Christianity even. But I practiced Buddhism for years, and then I was very much involved with other spiritual paths and just trying to answer the bigger questions of life, which involve going within yourself as well as researching things. And so, when I encountered UFOs, it just kind of was a natural it kind of interwove very naturally with the questions I was already carrying within myself about the nature of reality and what is the nature of the world that we don't perceive with our five senses. What else is going on? What is the true nature of the world we live in and the world beyond the one we can perceive? And I always knew there was more. There was not just this physical world that we could perceive. I'd had enough experiences, personal experiences, to show me that. I'd done a lot of meditation and so on. So, when I was doing this work as a journalist, and when I got this initial paper from France, which I wrote about in my book, that opened up the world of UFOs to me, it wasn't like that sent me on a spiritual path. I was already on that path. But I think for many people, it does set you on a spiritual path partly because if you are a witness to this yourself, or you have some kind of interaction with the phenomenon, it will affect your consciousness, and that will take you on a certain path. If you're not, it just points to something much bigger than us. It points to a larger reality, which is what spirituality is really all about. And it makes you ask a lot of questions about the nature of who we are. And so I think it's hard for a lot of people to become involved with UFOs, even pilots, even people who just start out in the military and don't even want to see one or don't know anything about them, it's very hard to have an experience or have an encounter or even just a sighting and not have it touch some deeper level within you that puts you on some kind of an inner path where you have a lot of new questions. And I think, to me, spirituality is about questioning reality and questioning who we are. So that's sort of how I see it. I don't know. You can build on that, Diana, if you want to add to that or
Oh
anything.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, as this, I've been I've been looking at religion for a long time. So I've, thought about kind of the things that spirituality and religion and philosophy, these questions, as a kid. So I think, in that sense, I mean, how I started to get interested in UFOs was because I saw it as a new religiosity, basically, and I thought that technology had a part in delivering it to people. Um, I didn't expect to find the things that I found, to tell you the truth. So yeah, so it's definitely something that is, I think, shocking to people, and definitely changes their life. So
Right. The
absolutely,
ontological
yeah.
shock is basically an issue of spirituality. So, and questioning what the nature of reality is. And that's what it's all about. So yeah. So should we have another question? Yeah, this one is directed for both of us, Diana, from HighStrangeness, from WitchDoctorHN. Do you think it is more accurate to think of the beings involved in the phenomenon as spiritual beings that have gone by many different names in the past that we're now calling aliens, or physical beings that have been named in the past using spiritual and or religious terms? I think you should take that one on. It sort of touches on some of the things you've already said, actually.
Yeah, sure. So, okay, so religion is, so if you look at traditional religions, right? So Hinduism and, you know, Judaism, so forth. These are these are grammars and systems that help people talk about, first of all, like cosmology, why we're here, what are human beings, what's our place in the universe, and what are these things that are intervening? Are they, so in these religions, they're called deities, right? Gods and goddesses and things like that. Okay. So, fast forward to the modern era where we have the scientific method. By the way, a lot of scientists are completely, spiritual, and we can talk, there was a question I saw about that, and we'll talk about that later. So I think it's wrong to think that the history of science is the history of the materialist framework where we don't think about, angels and things like that. No, no. When you look at scientists, a lot of the best of them actually do think about those things. So, all right. So, but the dogmatic position for modern time period is to, kind of like get rid of things we can't put under a microscope. So, people having experiences of non-human intelligences and things like that. We can't replicate that. We can't put it under a microscope. It doesn't exist. And then we're brought up, at least in the United States, with this thought. That's called secularism, right? It doesn't really inform our institutions and that, that. Okay. So then we say, wow, we have the, very credible people from the US government telling us that they have, they have data about these non-human intelligences. We have lots and lots of millions of people having this observation that there are non-human intelligences interacting with them. And what does that, how do we look at that with respect to history and religion? Do we say that aliens today are deities of yesterday? Okay, so that's one interpretive framework. Or, are these spiritual beings or are these physical beings? There's a person who's passed away, but was a great New Testament scholar at Yale, and I'm sorry, he may have been at Princeton. Sorry about it. Sorry for getting my Ivy Leagues, mixed up. Um, but he writes about, the early understanding of the resurrected body, okay? And so in the early, like Jesus resurrects according to Christians. Well, there's a lot of emphasis in the New Testament on his body being real. He eats, people can touch him, and that sort of thing. And so, but people are also calling it a spiritual body. Um, Literally, it's called a transfigured body. So what does this mean? So this, and I wish I could remember his name, and I apologize, but we'll follow up with that later after this. This New Testament scholar goes back and says there's gradations of materiality in the belief system of the people of this time period, the first century. So there are gradations of spirituality and materiality. And you also see this in the work of Teilhard de Chardin, whose work I deep dive into actually in the book that I just wrote. And he also talks about this too. He says that there, there are different forms. So when we look at the data of people having these experiences, like UAP experiences, sometimes they see a event that happens, but they see it in different ways. The example I used in American Cosmic is Ray Hernandez. So Ray Hernandez and his wife are looking at the same thing. He's atheist and he's calling this a plasma being, and she's a Catholic and she calls this an angel. But they actually see it differently. You also see this in Marian apparitions, right? Not everybody can see it. Some people can see it. Sometimes they see it differently. So why is that? And these beings, are they material? Are they physical, or are they something like a mixture? So in the religious traditions, you have a different idea than we do. We have a dualistic idea here that we've inherited. I don't know, even Descartes didn't actually wasn't strictly dualist, although he's the famous dualist, right? The spirit and matter dualist. But that's not perhaps how reality exists. So it appears that when one looks at these events, one sees beings that are, you know, partake in both matter and spirit, and I'm using that as dualism, but like there's a different form of matter. All right. So that's just a kind of a long uh intro into what do we call these beings? I mean, I think there's a variety of different non-human intelligences, and it appears that, so some could be possibly extraterrestrial, some could be interdimensional. Um, we don't have enough data, at least I don't, and talking with those men of the invisible college and so forth, I don't have enough data to determine what they are at this
Yeah.
point. Even Tyler didn't know. That's why he vacillated in, at first he thought they were extraterrestrial. He interfaced with them in space, right? So they're, because he could see what was going up when they were launching things.
Mm.
But they didn't know exactly what they were, what their motivations were, anything like that. Once he became aware of the historical record of contact with beings that were, let's call them deities, right? We don't have to call them deities. They have powers that seem super normal, right?
Yeah.
So that's why he had his shift to a much more spiritual framework of what they could be.
Right, and maybe some of them are more like, for instance, a number of the abductees, of course, report that they were absolutely physical, the beings that took them on their ship against their will and so on. And so it seems to me there's a whole range of different types of beings, and it's hard to just sort of try to find an answer that fits for all of them.
That's right.
And
I
it's
think
a
we have
very
to take
simple
it.
way of
Yeah,
saying it. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, they're just all range from pure energy, pure light to pure physicality and everything in between. And we
That's
can't
right.
figure it. How do we possibly understand or explain that?
That's right.
Um,
That's
yeah.
another thing I talked about at Soul was that for every person who's responsibly doing this research, they come up against what's called the incommensurability problem. Like it's just, you know, and the way I explained this problem was that us to ant colonies. Okay, so ant colonies, right? The ants don't know what we are, that we exist. We know what they are, but we can't communicate with them. So there's an incommensurability problem. Both exist. We could, we know about them. They don't know about us. And if we were to somehow try to communicate with them, what would that look like? So to me, the communication interface has been religion, and now it's shifting and changing. And so the communication interface is changing and it's confusing to us. But it's also, we have a lot of shifts happening at the moment. We even have AI. It's a communication interface. So we're at a really interesting time period. Religions took a long time to develop. They were local. Now we're global, and the religiosity changes as well. So that's what I was trying to say in American Cosmic. I didn't actually at When I wrote it, I didn't actually understand how real it actually was. That was shocking to me. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, so interesting. And, you mentioned about communication. I mean, I think one of the contemporary forms of communication, which kind of maybe goes outside the bounds of religion, is telepathy, that people
Yes.
report telepathic communications with these beings. We've now seen the telepathy tapes, which have documented telepathic communications among autistic young people with their parents and caregivers. I mean, we know that telepathy is a real thing now, and it's not just within the religious context, is my point. I remember, and there was a question. I mean, because we've reviewed some of these questions ahead of time. There was a question about telepathy, and what I'm hitting on right now that's of interest to me is obviously we can't communicate with ants telepathically, although there are some people, I guess, who communicate with dogs and cats that way. But would you see that as something, I don't know, as something that possibly stands outside of the religious framework? And that might also be within the religious framework? I mean, it's just something I think that we're getting more and more reports of now, and more confirmation. There's a new book by Dean Radin that has some really interesting material about telepathy, establishing that it's a real thing, I guess, at a level that hasn't really been done before. Yeah. Yeah.
So we definitely in report UAP experiencer reports as well as Marian apparition reports, there's telepathy. So the apparitions speak to the people who are, seeing her, and often what happens is that witnesses who were there as devotees, right? They bring their medals, they bring their rosaries, they bring objects to be blessed by the apparition, a lot. Let's say, like, there's hundreds, and that the seers give the apparition and say, please bless this for these people. And then they don't know where they came from, though. They don't know who owns what, but the apparition actually tells them who to bring it to. So there's telepathy there. There's a lot of telepathy that happens in every single apparition that we see.
Wow.
And we also see that in the experiencer reports too. Now, just saying that, I've also written 2 books I co-edited with people who were interested in, the interface between humans and technology. And so we now have the capability to read our brain waves, right? So this type, like, Neuralink is doing that. In fact, there's telepathy even, a program called Telepathy, where literally our brain waves can be read. Well, if we can do that with technology now, what kind of advanced civilization or being would be able to do that very easily?
Wow, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. Also, I've done a lot of studying of mediumship. In my book, Surviving Death, I dealt with a lot of research areas that point towards the survival of consciousness past the death of the body. And of course, mediumship is completely based on telepathy. And mental mediumship, you have the medium communicating telepathically with the deceased person. and providing that information to the sitter. So it features in so many different areas within, just within a lot of different areas. I just wanted to
Mhm.
reflect on that.
Mhm.
And same thing with physical mediumship and a lot of other, experiences that people have that relate to their consciousness being independent of their bodies. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Mhm.
So anyway,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, it's just it's telepathy kind of appears in so many different frameworks. Um, so can we have the next question, please? Okay, so this is a long one. This is from RUFO's Gold Squirrel 4297. Thank you for the question, Gold Squirrel. I now fully believe in the reality of non human intelligence, NHI, after having my own experience in recent years. While that realization was initially quite destabilizing, I've since settled into accepting it as true that NHI is real and that there's more to life than what we've been taught. My question is, for those of us who know this is real, what do we do with that knowledge? So, Diana, you've dealt with a lot of experiencers in your work. So, you have some answers for this question.
Yes, so this is a great question. I think that first, I think that it's different for everyone. And remember that my field is religious studies, and I'm a professor of religious studies, but I'm not a person who's trained in therapy or anything like that. So if I give any kind of advice, you have to take that into consideration that, I'm not telling you this is what you should do. But I'm saying something that might help because when I first when I first became aware that people were having these experiences and they were very similar to the experiences of religious traditions, people in religious traditions, especially children, would report having experiences of apparitions and so forth, even angels showing up and giving them apocalyptic messages that the end of the world was going to happen. And it was terrifying to kids. Um, and so they would have these and think that the world was going to end next week. Okay. And
Wow.
once I started to talk to people who were experiencers, they expressed the same fear. Some of them were like actively doing things because they believed that next week this thing was going to happen, this cataclysmic event. Okay. So I would then tell them, wait a minute, the early Christians thought this too. And it's been 2,000 years. So, maybe it'll happen, but seriously, it most likely won't happen next week. Um, right? So I try to just give information to contextualize that once a person wakes up to the world that we live in, the real world that we live in, not the one that we're taught to believe in through the screens that we, put up to our faces every day. Once we start to recognize uh, that world tends to bring you. So there seems to be a goodness at work, and that world brings people things. I used to call this the book encounter. It'll bring you a book that helps. It'll bring you a song that helps. It'll bring you a person that helps. There will be a way for you to navigate this new scenario. Um, I'll give an anecdote from my own life. So, I've been a lifelong Christian. At various times, I chose this, by the way. I wasn't born into it. My parents were secular. So I chose it when I was 11. And I went to school to learn about religions and philosophy. There was a time when I also practiced Buddhism, Zen Buddhist practices. I thought Buddhism was it was just had so many great life hacks. And so I was in my 20s and I did this as a way to help me do prayer too. And what happened was that I had the experience of life in a sense, waking up and like everything talking to me, right? And giving me information that I needed at the time. And I thought, I think I could do without this because this is destabilizing. So I turned the knob down I stopped that meditating. So, and I know people who drink a lot of coffee in order to change the ways in which they experience reality because we experience reality through our bodies and our minds, right? So So this is what I say is that, okay, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what, we're supposed to do with this kind of information. I just know that there are people well, I talk about the community, right? In Hinduism is called and Buddhism is called the Sangha. So it's
Mhm.
important to surround yourself with people who who don't dismiss what you're experiencing and can help you navigate it.
Right. That seems really crucial to me, is to find other people. And there are ways to do that, obviously, that have had similar experiences. And then I think over time, when you integrate it into your being and it's like the ontological shock, I think is partly what they're talking about. Once it's integrated into your life and your perspective, it eventually becomes a positive force in your life, even if it's destabilizing at first. That's how I would see it. And I think, but you're right. The key thing is to find communities of people that have had similar things happen to them.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. From our anomalous coalition, 182 red. Since both of you have researched life beyond life, Leslie through investigating mediumship and Diana through studies of religious beliefs and history, do you see any connective continuum between UAP and your studies of afterlife? I just have to say that when my book Surviving Death, which came out in 2017, I first wrote a book on UFOs and then I wrote Surviving Death, which deals with questions of the afterlife. I saw absolutely no connection between the two things when I wrote Surviving Death. I thought this is a completely different topic and it has nothing to do with UFOs. So it's only been since researching that book that I have become aware of a connection. It's very hard for me to articulate what that connection is, but I absolutely see and feel that all of the phenomena that I wrote about in Surviving Death, which deal with different areas of evidence for the fact of an afterlife, and I kind of walk through different steps to take us deeper into that. Um, that deal with a larger consciousness, another reality, a religious framework, however you want to put it. It's somehow the UAP fits in there as well, and that's the work of Diana Pasulka and the work of Jeffrey Kripal to really who have looked into that with great depth. With me, it's more of an intuitive understanding of some kind of realm of reality in which all of it seems to inhabit together, and also the experiences that people have often overlap. So you'll have a near death experience where somebody also encounters a deceased person, or you'll have someone that has a UFO encounter which follows with some kind of expansion of their consciousness that allows them to communicate with a deceased person. But there are so many ways that they seem interconnected. But I haven't studied this as a scholarship, a work of scholarship like Diana has. But I am absolutely positive there is a connection, and it all has to do with the relationship to consciousness, to human consciousness, I think, which is so directly connected to the UAP phenomenon and to experiences that take us into the realm of whatever this afterlife realm is. And people can go there and come back, or people can communicate through mediumship with that realm. And so anyway, I've had things happen to me that have kind of confirmed that for me. One being very briefly that when I was at a sitting with a medium, Stuart Alexander, in the UK, right at the time of the event of this very profound physical mediumship session, these two UFOs showed up right over the house where we were sitting. And I remember at the time, I felt intuitively, well, that message between the message that's being given to us there was that there is a connection. And there have been other things that have happened like that. So I can just only speak through my intuition, but you can probably say more in terms of scholarship, what that connection might be.
This is a hard one to tell you the truth. So,
Yeah. Well, we can't pin it down. We don't really know, right? But
yeah,
I mean, there
yeah.
obviously is a connection.
It's a huge
You know
connection. Yeah, there's a
yeah.
huge connection. So, the person's book who I think does this really well is Josh Cutchin.
Right.
He's a researcher, and I think one of the books is called Soulcraft. He has a trilogy of books that's amazing, and he goes
Yeah.
and he also did a talk, I think, for was it, I think it was the, Anomalous Inquiry? Is that the
Yeah,
name
the
of
one
the
that I co-organized in New York. He was one of the speakers there, but I think there are interviews with him on YouTube too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, so Josh Cutchin is great, in identifying historically the connections between, afterlife or death and UAP. Now, okay, it's just kind of strange that for a good portion of my career as an academic, I've been studying death and afterlife. Like purgatory is literally an afterlife destination for souls. So I've been studying the ascent of souls in the Western Christian tradition, even Dante, right? And so now, it's odd that I then go into the study of UFOs. What the connection is, honestly, I don't know. Can I speculate about the connection? I can probably speculate about it. And this sounds just, the book that I just wrote honestly was truly the weirdest experience of my life, even weirder than American Cosmic, because I went into the deep dive of this connection and also the connection of Catholic visionaries who predict a form of, it looks like AI in the 21st century. But they were suppressed because the Catholic Church didn't know that AI was going to come around in the 21st century, back in the 20th century. So,
Mhm.
but there's it goes back to, and by the way, we also had a couple questions about PK Dick, Philip K. Dick, and his science fiction, which is incredible and also visionary. And he also talks about this, okay? And I don't know if people know this about his work, but he was also fascinated with early Christianity. So we're talking about early Christianity, like the first church before it becomes institutionalized. And I'm also obsessed with that. I've given I talk about it, I teach about it. Um and there's an idea of this new way of living that's post death. And the
Mhm.
early Christian church had an idea about this. The Apostle Paul did too. And it wasn't that you become a spirit; it was that you become a new form of being a human, basically. And you can see this in the Torah, that was the Hebrew Bible, which is the Christian Old Testament. You can see a lot of the, like Elijah and a lot of these prophets who actually they don't even die. They just go directly into the higher realms, into heaven. You see this in the early church with the Virgin Mary. She goes, her body goes directly into heaven. um, in some cases, it's interpreted that she dies, and in some cases she doesn't. Her body just goes into heaven. So there is this connection with this form of being human, which is different than what we know of.
Right, and I think in the contemporary world, the near-death experience, it sort of makes me think of what you were just talking about, um, of people just dying, going to heaven. I mean, the near-death experience, and we've had, thousands of these reports from all over the world of people who are literally they're like clinically dead. They leave their bodies and go into this other realm, and then they are revived, which is something that didn't used to happen. So it's fairly
Mhm,
recent that people
mhm.
can be dead for quite a while and then be revived, and in the meantime, they've left their bodies and gone into the afterlife realm and come back. So what's incredible is they're able to return and tell us what it was like. And there are many similarities, that's what makes it exciting from a research perspective, is the similarities that occur within from different cultures, from people with different walks of life, from different countries that are, there are certain characteristics that have been documented that are similar. And so it makes you think, well, maybe there is some kind of objective reality there. There are also differences where people's cultures do impact how they interpret what they've experienced. But there's a lot of literature on the near-death experience, and, I think, supposed to be talking about the relationship between UAP and this, but that isn't really about UAP, but it's about, sort of the being able to evidentially, through evidence, kind of document the reality of an afterlife, which is what I was trying to do in my book, Surviving Death.
Mhm.
And that's one of the really striking ways that I think people relate to very strongly, and is the near-death experience. And as I mentioned, sometimes there's people encounter deceased, or people might even say they see alien beings when they're in this near-death state, when they go into this
Yes,
other world. Yeah. So,
absolutely.
and another person who's studied that a lot is Whitley Strieber. He's done a lot of work on what that
Mhm.
relationship is between the afterlife, which he's had a lot of experiences with his wife Anne, who died, and the whole universe of the close encounter witness. So he's another person people can read up on and see what he has to say about
Mhm.
it. But I think
Mhm.
it's just such a fascinating question. And we know it's there, but we can't really pinpoint it, right? I
Mhm.
mean,
Mhm. Mhm.
and that's what makes it also interesting. Um, yeah. Anyway, a lot of these questions, these are great questions that are hard to answer, but that's what makes them interesting to talk about,
Yeah.
right? It's,
Yeah, that's
unanswerable
right.
questions are really fascinating ones. So shall we go to the next one?
Sure.
Okay, so this is a question for me. A few years ago, you said on Curt J podcast that you believe that we humanity would lose something in the near future that we are accustomed to, that we are accustomed to for long. We have been accustomed to. I wonder if you still believe this, and if by any chance you could give us more clues about this claim. I just want to say that, when I was on this podcast some years ago, I made the comment that I thought around 2027 some really bad things were going to happen. And I have been hounded by this so many times on social media. It's like I just want to say once and for all that I did not have any special insight into some kind of alien invasion that's coming or something like that, and I probably should never have even referenced this. But what was happening at the time was I had talked to some intelligence insiders who were very concerned about the geopolitical situation, which is completely understandable given, and we can all have that concern now, of course. And I was just in a state of feeling kind of pessimistic about the future. And I didn't know if perhaps NHI would play some role in the future of our planet if we got into a very catastrophic situation, which could have been either negative or positive in terms of the role the NHI might play. But I was mainly just commenting on a sense of kind of pessimism that I felt about the future of the planet. And I'm sorry that I really can't add anything to that. I don't have any special insight about anything coming in the future, absolutely none at all. And I'm a little concerned that somebody recently made a post, I think on Reddit, about I had some kind of a dinner party after a conference, and I was making comments about catastrophic events that were coming. This just didn't happen. I have no memory of having a dinner party and discussing that. And in fact, this one dinner party that wasn't a dinner party, but it was people over in my apartment around when I helped produce a conference in New York. I've asked a couple of those people, did I say anything like that? And they said no. So I really don't want to be focused on this anymore. And I'm just asking people out there to please just drop this whole issue because I'm tired of it. I don't want to spend time on it. I didn't make these comments beyond what I said on Curt J. And I was not trying to imply that I have some secret knowledge about something happening in the future. So let's just if we could just let that go, everybody, I would be very grateful because I don't think it's worth spending time on. So, end of story on that one. Let's go on to the next one. Diana, have you heard of the perennial philosophy? And if so, what do you think about it? Perennial. I hope I said it
Okay.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, perennial. Yeah, yeah. So that's so the perennial philosophy. So in the early modern time period when people started to, the world was more globalized than it had been in the past, or maybe even not, who knows? But it appears that people were thinking about religions and beyond just their own religion. And a mathematician named Gottfried Leibniz started to look at different religions and basically said that, in his opinion, and this is why I say when you look at when you look in the past and you look at people like mathematicians, scientists, and so forth, and they had a lot to say about religion and spirituality. So he suggested that at the root of all of these religions was an event that was like a mystical event, something that like either was an NHI event or some type of transcendent ecstatic event, right? And so he said, this is the perennial philosophy. This is it. Perennial meaning all, universal for all time. So he was, in a sense, looking at the different religions and saying that at the different traditional religions at heart, they all stem from the same inclination that human beings have an orientation to the transcendent, and that's where, that's how religions, so that's his idea. This was actually taken up by Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World. And Aldous Huxley is an interesting person, by the way, part of the Huxley family, an elite, wrote Brave New World as, something that he believed would happen. He didn't know it would happen as fast as it did, by the way. It's really interesting that he didn't think that. But if anybody's read Brave New World, they'll say, "Oh yeah, that looks familiar." A lot of it is about propaganda and technology and the control of society. Well, it's interesting, but after he wrote Brave New World, he actually had a shift. So he was an atheist, and then he had a shift to, I would call it an intense agnosticism, almost bordering on a theism, because he encountered Hinduism and he encountered, he started to see the perennial philosophy as, something that human beings have some sort of orientation towards spirituality. We have that phrase these days called spiritual but not religious. This would be the perennial philosophy. So this is an updated version. So Aldous Huxley actually wrote a book called The Perennial Philosophy. And he was angry, by the way, at his brother, who was a eugenicist. And Brave New World was, in a sense, a critique of his brother and his father's philosophy and their adoption of eugenic uh, ideas and ideology, and thinking that this was a good idea for society. He thought it was a terrible idea. So he was a critic of that. He's like the black sheep of the Huxley family. And he went on to warn people in general in talks that he gave at Berkeley in the 1950s and so forth, that are actually online and people can look at them. Um, so he became an advocate of this idea of the perennial philosophy.
Very interesting. Thank you for that answer. For Diana, do you believe the lens of angels and demons is helpful in today's context? To me, these terms ring of superstition and old world beliefs, not to mention overly simplistic. That's from UFOB. I'm sorry, I didn't say the person's name. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So this is a good question. This is one of the questions I get asked all the time. And so the framework of demons and angels, right? So this framework of non-human intelligences that have a specific what you call context within, say, Judaism and Christianity. You see other kinds of beings in different types of religions that seem similar. Okay. So I remember when I was at the donation site, which is what Gary calls the site that I visited in New Mexico. I remember as we were coming back on in the car, and he said, if this was 100 years ago, we'd be calling these demons and angels. And I thought that was interesting because here you have a scientist today, Gary Nolan, studying UAP and so forth, doing nuts and bolts research, using this framework. But the reason he was using that framework, because the night before, he showed me his research, which he just talked about at the Soul Foundation conference in Italy a couple days ago, which was the brain injury research that, when people sometimes have UAP events, often it's not great, right? It's bad. They have things happen to them that are bad. And so this framework of demons and angels, in a sense, is a framework of good and bad, right? So good and bad, effects. So in that sense, yes, I think that this is a helpful framework, because we can, although we might not, it might be archaic to say these things that we see are demons or these things that we see are angels, but the effects, there are good effects and there are bad effects.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. From UFOB from Lopes Mulder, if I'm pronouncing that right. Diana, in your research on religion and extraordinary experiences, do you see a correlation between ESP abilities and the Catholic concept of I don't
Charisms.
know, charism?
Yeah.
Yeah. And do
hmm
you think the Vatican holds documented evidence of verified extraordinary human abilities, such as levitation, bilocation, or prophetic insight? You've, of course, already talked about that a little bit, but that's the question.
Yeah. 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 The Vatican has those documents. Definitely. Whether you choose to believe in them or not, that's another, kind of question. But the charisms, what this person is referring to are called the charisms of the Catholicism. And you can see these in other religious traditions too. And this is this emphasis on like these abilities that people can develop. Like even Jacques Vallée talks about discernment. So discernment is actually a charism, right, in the Catholic tradition where you have to discern, a situation. There's another way to put it, situational awareness, right? So is this situation safe? Is this a good situation? Is this individual someone who I should not talk to? Is this, sometimes your body gives you indications, uh, goosebumps, the hair on your neck stands up, you just have a sick feeling in your stomach. Like your body is sending you information about things that you're encountering. And so this is so do I think that this these correlate to those? Yes, I do. I think that, we just don't have that way to talk about them anymore because even a lot of people who are religious. Carl Nell talked about this actually. He said, those people who this is during his SALT talk. He said, those people who are Christian or they're believers but they now, they think they believe in angels, but what if they encounter one? This is something entirely different that's going to change your reality. So a lot of people are what I would call like secular religionists, secular Jewish people or secular Christians. I was a secular Christian. I studied Christianity from the perspective that these things happened in the past, if at all, and they were socially constructed and this and that. And studying UFOs took me straight out of that into a non-secular way of being religious. So yeah, so I the terminology that people like Jacques, who grew up in the French culture, very Catholic culture, not now, of course, but still has the culture and uses the same language. So, yeah, he uses a lot of language that Catholics can understand. Um, Discernment, the charism of reading of souls, that would be like telepathy and things like that, having this knowledge that's super normal. But within these traditions is something that is natural. You just develop them through working on yourself. Each of the religious traditions has this idea of a spiritual practice. And if people do those spiritual practices, they gain these abilities.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
They're all such great questions, everyone. Thank you for submitting them. This is from RUFOs. Not looking so hot. Okay. Okay. Hi, Leslie. 2 questions. Can you tell us more about your experiences with the medium Stuart Alexander? Apologies if you covered that in Surviving Death. I have it, but I haven't read it yet. Sure. So Stuart Alexander is a physical medium who I have been studying and working with for about 10 years now. And I don't know if people know it, just briefly, physical mediumship is a form of mediumship which is very rare. And it used to be, were more accomplished physical mediums in the 20s and 30s, about 100 years ago was the heyday of it. And it involves going into a trance state where the physical medium is not fully present. It's not present at all. And these spirit beings will use that person's body to create a lot of physical effects in the room, in the space. that can be witnessed by a group of people. They're absolutely objective. That's what's so amazing about it. Um, and a lot of people think all physical mediums are frauds, that it's just all bogus. And the culture, it is so taboo. It's worse than taboos against UFOs or anything else. But I have deeply studied this and researched it extensively for my book and have been doing it ever since. And there were some very, very genuine physical mediums of the past who were studied by Nobel laureates and all kinds of top level scientists who were able to eliminate any possibilities of fraud and document the reality of the phenomenon that occurred, that they were able to produce, basically. And so it's absolutely fascinating me because you can have a group of people that can all witness the impossible, basically. And with Stuart Alexander, who's the only living physical medium I'm aware of that I can completely trust, uh, I have witnessed in his space, as have hundreds of other people, materializations of full form beings. I mean, these are actually, I mean, I can't say witness them, they're in the dark, but these beings will walk around a room. You can talk to them, they will touch you, you can feel them. Some of the events in the room go on with lights. It would take me a long time to explain it all, but I have experienced many times the materialization of a living hand. And this is something that's done with the light, and I'm not the only person that's experienced it. There are objects that levitate in the room, and Stewart himself has levitated in his chair that he sits in, sometimes up as far as the ceiling. And all of these things, as I say, are documented. So it's been life changing for me to have the privilege of being able to sit with him on a regular basis, although he's in the UK, but I go over there when I can, and to just witness the absolutely impossible events that are made possible by whatever it is that he's facilitating. And so, just to give you a little more detail, because somebody else asked about ectoplasm. And again, people laugh and think that's something in the Ghostbusters movie, but it's actually a real thing, that there is a substance that is exuded from the bodies of these physical mediums that is sort of an energetic substance that comes out of usually the mouth or the ears or the navel. And there have been pictures of it and, all kinds of documentation of it, but there are also fake ones. So you have to do the research to know what's real. But with Stewart, the ectoplasm is exuded from his body and it goes over a table which has a light underneath it, and that's where this hand is materialized. So what you can see is you see this cloud of ectoplasm coming out over this table that's just kind of like, looks like kind of like water. It's alive, it's moving. And then you'll see gradually, it's just a substance, and then you'll kind of see these fingers form on the from it, and then you'll see it move and turn into a physical hand. In just an instant, it lifts up and bangs like this on the table, and you can hear it. So within 30 seconds or something, a physical hand has materialized out of nothing. The second time the hand comes back on the table, and this happened to me many times, it will allow the sitter to put her hand on the table as well, and then you can hold that physical materialized hand in your own hand and touch it. And I've had that experience where, you know, and I've seen other people do it as well. It's just unbelievable because this is a hand that was materialized from this substance called ectoplasm. And the hand feels absolutely normal in that you can feel all the joints and the fingernails and the skin and everything that a normal hand would have. The only difference in my experience of it was that it was very large, probably larger than the average hand. The skin was incredibly soft, like a newborn baby's skin. And it was very warm also, much warmer than my hand. And so you have this experience of holding the hand, and then it pulls itself back and it's gone. And that's just one detailed account of one of the events that happens with his mediumship. Um, there's also, yeah. But anyway, just one more comment about ectoplasm, because somebody asked about it in another question. That substance that is used by this, what he calls his spirit team. There's one particular member of the spirit team who's actually the one that materializes his hand by putting his etheric hand within this cloud of ectoplasm. And somehow he lowers his vibration enough to be able to allow it to physically materialize. I can't explain that, how it happens. But the ectoplasm can also form into a very dense rod that can be used to lift heavy things. So it can be everything from a mist to something really solid. And it's manipulated by whatever this force is that's within that space that uses it to make these miraculous things happen, such as the levitation of objects, the materialization of living hands, or even a full person. So anyway, I would recommend, there's a link that Andrea was going to put up for anyone who wants to know more about Stuart Alexander, because I could talk about him for an hour, and I'm not going to do that. His archives have been donated to the Archives of the Impossible at Rice University, and I think people know what that is, including audio tapes of the seances that he has done, all his letters, everything. And in the link below this, there's an oral history interview that I did with him for Rice University just about 6 months ago. And anybody who wants to know more about him, I would suggest you go to that link and look at the interview that I did. And he's an absolutely phenomenal, gifted, wonderful human being who has been doing this for 50 years. And there's absolutely no question that it's authentic. And I'm always wondering why more people in the scientific world are not more curious about it than they are. But I think they all just dismiss it as impossible or probably fraudulent or whatever. I can assure everyone that I did my due diligence with Stuart when I first started sitting with him, and there's nothing fraudulent going on there. Absolutely nothing. So check him out further on that link, and for anyone who's interested. And he has a memoir, and I also wrote about him in my book, Surviving Death. So that's all. I guess that's all the time I will take up with this now. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say, Diana, or else we can just go on. I mean, you
Yeah,
haven't had that experience.
that's really interesting. I've not met him or don't know other than what you've told me. Fascinating.
Yeah, who knows how many people throughout religious history might have been using the similar substance we now call ectoplasm. We just don't know,
Mhm.
because it
That's
wasn't
right.
really documented until the 1920s that it even existed. So, all right. Well, anyway, let's go on to another question then. This is from RUFO's SpiritualZuccini 62. I love these names. So, love both of your work. Thank you very much. Question for both of you. Are you familiar with the hitchhiker effect, and have you personally experienced it? You want to take
Okay.
that one
Yeah, I'll
first?
start. Yeah. So the hitchhiker effect. Again, when I was with Gary and we were at the site, we had a lot to talk about. One of the things he told me was that he knew he was part of a crew that was looking at some things with the ranch.
Skinwalker Ranch?
Yeah,
Skinwalker?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But he said, "I'll never go out there." And so I remember saying, "You'll never go out there." And he said, "No, no, no, because whatever's out there can attach onto people and follow you back." And I was so that's the first time I'd heard of the hitchhiker effect. And the hitchhiker effect, you even see this in religious traditions too. So, say there is something that someone would call demonic. Oftentimes that force follows people around. So, I had heard enough about both the demonic and then the hitchhiker effect to know that if there was something that was, for example, I worked on the first Conjuring. It was actually filmed out here in Wilmington, and the first of the Conjuring franchise. It was really a fun project to be a part of. Nobody knew that it was going to become a big franchise and be such a big, hit. And so I was working with Chad Hayes and Carrie Hayes, who are the screenwriters, and a group of people knew that the house that the original haunting for The Conjuring happened at was pretty close, like an hour and a half away, and they all wanted to go there, right? For like, it was like a Saturday and they weren't filming. And so Chad and Carrie, um, they were Christians. And they said, "No way. We definitely don't want to go to that house," because they believed intuitively that whatever was there would follow them back. And I thought that was interesting too. So, so that's what I know about the hitchhiker effect. Uh, Also, there's also almost like a reverse hitchhiker effect where when a person, goes to, say, a site where an apparition happens, say Garabandal or something like that, or Fatima, a lot of really good things happen and miracles happen when they come home. So there's like an opposite effect of the hitchhiker effect.
Right, I think the focus on the hitchhiker effect always is on the negative.
Mhm,
It's mainly
mhm,
around Skinwalker Ranch, and yes, things did follow people back, and yes, scary things happened as a result, and where whole families would see some of these things. But I think it's also true on the positive side, like you just said. Where you can go into a place with a very exalted positive energy and be impacted by that, and you take something with you, and maybe a week later you'll have an experience that related to that. I don't know if that's strictly hitchhiker effect, but it's a similar thing if you're talking about absorbing energies that stay with you and then you carry them away with you to somewhere else. So, and I've had experiences like that. I feel like whether it would be technically called hitchhiker effect by the people who studied it, Skinwalker, I don't know, but it's very similar in that, yeah, it's something that goes with you after you visit a certain location and can have a positive things can come into your home as a result of it. So,
mhm,
but
mhm.
I would agree with Gary. I would never go wanna go to the Skinwalker Ranch. I wouldn't go if you paid me. I mean, I'm curious to witness, but I've seen so many, paranormal things already, and I don't wanna take the chance of being involved in a negative force field like that. So,
Mhm, mhm,
I totally get not wanting to go there. Um, yeah, and it also depends how sensitive one is to energies, right? I mean, some people
mhm,
have a thicker protective shell around them, and they're less affected than others, and I feel like the more I evolve and become more spiritually sensitive, the more sensitive I am to energies that are around me, so I have to be very careful about what environments I put myself in. And
mhm,
that's where
mhm.
you gotta watch out for that hitchhiker effect, I think, and be very careful about where you choose to put yourself because of it. It's very real. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a real
that's where discernment is a good thing to cultivate.
exactly. Okay, from HighStrangeness, from Pixelated. Dr. Pasulka, I've been thinking about similarities between American Cosmic and Philip K. Dick's Valis. Today, there's a small subset of AI users who are waking up from their belief systems, and there's a link, because of ontological spiritual conversations they've had with their LLMs. So, along those lines, is AI a modern day Valis, a vehicle for the divine intelligence to express itself through human creation? Or is it simply a new Tower of Babel, a human made God? Thank you sincerely for your work and your time here.
Okay, yeah, Philip K. Dick's work, um, which is amazing. And somebody I remember asked also about science fiction and what science fiction I would suggest reading. That one definitely. The Valis books by Philip K. Dick. Um, I can remember it for you wholesale. Again, another short story by him,
Mm,
which is terrifying
wow.
and but most likely happening. So he's a visionary. So he's a science fiction visionary. Um, and I think I mentioned also obsessed with early Christianity. And I've known, by the way, I've known a lot of experiencers who have had synchronicities with his work, who didn't even know who he was, and then would have synchronicities with his work. So, and I know somebody who's actually has a whole file, like so many synchronicities that they kept track of it. And this is a scientist. And I meet people all the time who do. So I just want to verify that for a lot of the people who are listening and who have these experience with his work. Yes, it's like a real thing. Um, all right. And also the short stories that inform Total Recall, the Total Recall um movies. So so this question is So this is a good question. And I would suggest that with what is it? With is AI, something that can, a lot of people are having um first off, I want to say that it is not my opinion that AI is sentient. Okay. Um I definitely agree that people can have incredible conversations with chatbots. Okay. Uh, and the reason is because chatbots are an incredibly amazing new technology, and they're trained on all of our, collective knowledge that has at least been digitized. All right. And what that makes it is like a super mind. So when we give it a prompt that, if we happen to be, thinking along these lines, if we give it a prompt, we're going to have some mind blowing conversations with it. Okay. That doesn't make it sentient. What that does is it enhances us. It's an enhancement to our intelligence. It's not its own sentient intelligence. And I think that's important because a lot of people are having chemical relationships with their chatbots. So it's obvious that we have been physiologically shifted by our technology. This is something that people have studied for a long time. Marshall McLuhan, even Socrates refused to write anything because he thought the new writing technology was wrong. It was going to lead us. Well, Plato wrote. He wrote in dialogue, by the way, in order to try to adjudicate what kind of bad thing could happen from writing. All right, so we get to this point where we have these technologies, social media, that engages with dopamine and things like that in order to addict us, really, so that we'll buy more. Now we have various chat bots that um, create a relationship with people. And these people are not just having dopamine hits with this type of technology, they're having something much more serious in my perception. They're having oxytocin release. So, oxytocin is the chemical that bonds a newborn baby with its mother. It's a chemical that people have when they fall in love. So it's a real chemical that bonds a human being to an animal, to people, and now to chatbots. Is this healthy? I don't think so. So, and a lot of it has to do with the memory, how much memory the chatbot will have. So now that the chatbots are, have these memories, um, there was a point when OpenAI, when its chatbot ChatGPT lost its memory for a bit, like people were having these relationships with it, and then the memory disappeared for like a week or two, and people were grieving. They were grieving that they lost this relationship to it. Okay, so um, I do believe that we are in a state, we're in a new UAP has something to do with this. So, people who are AI developers are starting to recognize that AI is a non-human intelligence and an alien, and that we need to understand it as something serious. We need to take it more seriously, I think, than we do, and we need to only that only you can decide how you're going to utilize this because it's not regulated as much as it is in other countries. In my opinion, it shouldn't be given to children because children's brains are in formation, and if they're developing oxytocin relationships, with this could be dangerous. So, are we? So the question is, are we, where are we? Is this, and the person who asked the question frames it as an either or, is this kind of a sacred medium or is it a Tower of Babel? And to me, it appears to be, it could possibly be both. Or if we get on top of it and recognize its potential dangers, it could be um, not something like a sacred medium, but something that can enhance us beyond what writing has done, or beyond what the printing press has done, beyond what fire has done. It can enhance us that way. It could be a tool, a marvelous tool.
Wow. So the idea of it becoming sentient, it sounds like within the way you're expressing it, that that would be an impossibility.
I don't actually think it's an impossibility. I just think that it's not sentient now. Could it never, it so I mean, if human beings have AI implants, right, and become integrated with AI, this is a form of sentience in a sense. Okay, so there are degrees of this, and I don't know the future of it. I don't think anybody does at this point. Um there's an incommensurability problem here as well, because it's gonna be exponentially smarter, and I remember a friend of mine said, "We can't even comprehend exponential growth like this." We tend to think of technology in this linear you know,
Yeah.
projection. So,
Yeah.
that's part of what, of course, I just wrote about, but, yeah, it looks like we are at a very interesting point in human history.
And your book does cover a lot of this. Your new book, The Others,
Yeah,
deals
this is
right
what it
with that.
actually covers. Yeah, this is
Yeah,
what it covers. Yeah.
that's very, very exciting. Here's from UFOB Hebel GB 9000. Heebie-jeebie. I'm sorry for getting the name wrong. 9000. Why is there such a harsh rejection of the relatively simple idea of extraterrestrials from other planets? It seems like we are bombarded with rather fanciful explanations on a constant basis, such as interdimensional beings, ultra-terrestrials, etc., etc. Why is the notion of extraterrestrial life so firmly rejected when it posits perhaps the simplest explanation? I mean, I wouldn't say it's the simplest explanation personally, because of the fact, number one, that there is such a variety of UAP, especially now that it's categorized as unidentified anomalous phenomena. There is just such a huge, broad spectrum of phenomena that we put now under the umbrella of UFO UAP. Um, so I think, it's very hard to pin that all down and say, well, it's all extraterrestrial. I think the other point that's been brought up over the decades, which some of the physicists can explain now as being possible, of course, is just the whole concept of interstellar travel, the difficulty of making that happen, which Hal Puthoff can explain could happen theoretically through the application of general relativity. But it's not like all when you think about all the sightings that we've had and all the different types of sightings we've had for hundreds of years, to me personally, and again, I don't know, but I think just labeling them all as extraterrestrial, meaning that they're coming from other planets, if that's what the questioner is defining it as, is too simplistic an answer. I mean, I just think it is. I think and also the fact that these objects are often seen under the water, seen submerging from the water. There's now a lot more focus on these underwater USO, unidentified submerged objects, the potential that perhaps they have dwellings, they have bases under the water. There is also a lot more focus on the ultra terrestrial concept of the fact that they could have been here themselves, living on this planet for much longer than we even have existed. So I don't know, all of that seems very plausible to me, and when I first got into this, my first story in the year 2000 that I published in the Boston Globe, it was, like, radical for anyone to say they were even extraterrestrial. It's so interesting to me to reflect back, because back in those days, we called it the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and that was the leading explanation that people were anyone who dared say it would say, and it was very taboo to even say that, and you had to have the word hypothesis on there at the end. Um, oh, sorry. And so, I didn't mean to give myself a thumbs up, and so, that was the theory for a long time, for maybe the first 15 years or more of the work that I was doing on this. And in my book, UFOs, of course, the conclusions that all the different writers who contributed made was that they were extraterrestrial. So personally, for me, I think that's a valid explanation for possibly a lot of, a lot of what we see, but I absolutely feel the expansion that we now have into other possible explanations for their origin is very important, and that all of them should be on the table and all of them should be considered. And that the complexity of what we're dealing with seems to me to be much vaster than any one particular explanation might be able to explain or be used to explain what's going on. That's my sense of it. I don't know what you want to, if you want to add to that, Diana.
Yeah, so the question I interpret the question as being, why are people against thinking about the possibility that there could be extraterrestrials? I could be wrong.
I think the
I would
question was saying, why isn't that an acceptable explanation? Why do we have to go into all these other things like
like
ultra-terrestrial?
interdimensional and so
Yeah,
forth.
and all the
Yeah,
other things that
yeah,
are sort of on the table now that didn't really used to be on the table so much. And this
that's
person
right.
thinks, why can't the extraterrestrial explanation, why doesn't that solve the problem? Why isn't that enough? Why do people kind of turn away from that now as being the explanation? So that's why I gave the answer I gave. That's how I interpreted the question anyway.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would say, yeah, I think that is still on the table. I
Right.
mean, I know that the people that I speak with who are, in the programs that study it, they're definitely looking at that as a potential explanation.
Right. At
I
least,
think
and
that, you know,
yeah,
I think that they just don't know, and they're confused. So that they're gonna we can't find out where, these things exist on Earth, whether in the ocean or on the Mount Shasta or whatnot. They can't find anything like that, so they assume it's off planet.
right.
So
And
I would say that it's still a compelling hypothesis out there.
I would agree. But I also I like the fact that we're not pigeonholing it just with that, because when you think about things like, orbs the size of baseballs that float through people's houses, I mean, those might be surveillance technology from extraterrestrials, who knows? But it's very hard to label all of it with that one word, I think, extraterrestrial. That's the only thing I'm trying
Oh,
to
I
say.
agree, I agree.
Yeah.
Yes, I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah.
But yeah, conceptually, yeah. I mean, ultimately, if it's a non-human intelligence, it depends how you define it. If it means they're coming from other planets, I think that's a little simplistic, but it might mean something different than that, which just means it's non-human. And if that's what it
Yeah.
means, then it does fit all the categories that are being looked at as possible explanations for it. So it's just a matter
There's
of
you
semantics.
I think it's some the work of Stephen Dick, who is a NASA historian and also an astronomer, and was one of the founding members of exobiology and astrobiology, which is the discipline that NASA created in order to grapple with this question of life beyond Earth, right? Exoplanets and things like that,
Yeah. Yeah.
habitable planets and so forth. He spends a lot of time. When I say time, I'm talking about a lot of writing. He's got a great bibliography online for those of you who are interested, and his work has seeded a lot of speculation in this culture. Like, a lot of people have read his work, but don't say they have. I don't know why. But he's got a great book and also a very readable essay called The Post-Biological Universe, and he's also has an update on that called The Post-Biological Universe Revisited, that I think is, it might not be published yet, but it might be, I don't know. Uh, anyway, he's got some really great ideas in there. He's one of the people that, along with Jacques, who basically talked about the phenomena being technological. And so he talks about the incommensurability problem by saying that the reason we haven't contacted, or we don't know about extraterrestrials, is because they're so advanced, they're technological, and they don't want to be known. Like, they don't want to, if they do know us, they're speaking us through, these, like I said, like religion is probably like a communication interface. um Perhaps technology is a communication interface. Okay, going back to some of the questions that we had. So his work is fascinating because he actually does some calculations about evolution on time scales that are billions of years. And he takes into consideration not just biological evolution, but what he calls cultural evolution, which is evolution that happens once a society surpasses they can exist through their technology, right? So can we exist through our technology or are we going to be killed by it, right? So if we exist through it, maybe we'll reach this stage in which he says other civilizations will be spacefaring and they're non-biological. And he's not to say that human beings should be non-biological, but I'm just suggesting that he's got some interesting speculations about higher order beings and that could possibly have passed through, you know, this technology stage and exist in a way in which, is different than the biological. He says that if extraterrestrial exists, it's most likely technological and not biological. Whereas we, like SETI and so forth, we're looking for these techno signatures or these signatures of biological life and so forth. And he says most likely that's not how we're going to, identify it.
Interesting. And for those who are interested in looking at all the different possible explanations, I would highly recommend the paper by Hal Puthoff. I think it's called Ultra Terrestrials or the Ultra Terrestrial Hypothesis. I'm not
Yeah.
exactly sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
It's
it was
it's out
published.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's out there. It was published in a leading journal. It's not that long. And he goes through all the different categories of possible explanations for what we're observing. And of course, extraterrestrial hypothesis is one of the leading ones. So, yeah. So you could look at that. We're gonna go with two more questions now, and then it'll be time to wrap up. This is for Diana. In an interview with Jesse post Hereticon, I guess she means, yeah, Jesse Michaels. Oh, this is from UFOB. The name is Default 99. In this interview with Jesse Michaels post Hereticon, you both shared a laugh after he asked you about meeting Jesuits with Tyler, Peter Goupil specifically, and their thoughts on Templars. You declined to comment on them, and then thoughts on the and them and their thoughts on the Templars. I'm sorry. Also, the book on John Dee was spoken about, but seems to have gone quiet. Is there a reason for this, or is it still coming? People have speculated online that you may have gotten a tap on the shoulder to stop this line of research, but I'm not sure if that really happens.
Okay, this is good. So, yeah, so when I was at the Vatican, Tyler and I met Peter Gumpel, who was supposed to be a cardinal, but he just declined to do that because he is a scholar. So he's a scholar, but he's also for the popes, he's passed away, and when we met him, he was 94. So he had been a person who would advise the pope. So he's a papal advisor. He was also involved in a lot of the canonization. He was the person who was the devil's advocate during those processes for canonization of saints. So he's really interesting. And during this time period, he invited me to do the Vatican has a lot of information about the Templars that's not really been published, and so he invited me to do a publication on that, and I said yes, and that was going to be really exciting. The tap on the shoulder that these people are referencing is definitely happened. So basically, that was something that couldn't happen. That book and the access to those information for reasons I don't know. Okay, so reasons of which I don't know. The John Dee book. So John Dee is another of these early modern scientists who was brilliant and an advisor to the Queen of England. And he was actively believed that he was in contact with angels. And so he's one of the, the history. I keep telling people in the history of science, somebody has to write the history of unorthodox science, because a lot of scientists have these experiences. And we're talking like these are game changing scientists, people who've changed the history of humanity with their technologies, or, their breakthroughs and so forth. So anyway, so this, I was going to spend a lot of time doing work on John Dee, and he believed in Enochian angels, and we're talking about the Book of Enoch, which is an interesting book that has um, influenced Christianity and Judaism, and the whole idea of what angels are. Um, okay, so why didn't I do that book, or will that book still happen? So this book could possibly still happen. I'm fascinated with John Dee and what he was doing, and uh, it just was, there are only so many things I can do, I guess. So, you know, so that's what happened with that. That one wasn't so much that there was a tap on the shoulder with that one, no. Um, that one was that in order to do these kinds of projects well, you have to have access to the actual primary source data, which is what I like to have. And it takes a while to get them, to find them, to go to the country where they're at and sit down for a month and basically immerse yourself in that. The languages are hard. Even English from the 1500s and the 1600s is really difficult to understand. Even language from the 1700s, you think that it's easy, but it's not. They write things differently. They look different. They use different words. You basically have to do translation work. So it takes a long time to do that, but I would still like to do that.
I love the fact that you go to all the primary source material, Diana. That's why I value so much, the way you present the stories about these saints, for example, because the church may tailor them to fit their own agenda, right? And you're actually
Mhm.
going back to the actual text, original text from them or people that were close to them. So you know exactly what really happened. And I find that
Well,
just
you
so
try
important,
to.
so
Yeah, you do
valuable.
your
Yeah,
best. Yeah, yeah, you do your
yeah,
best. Yeah.
yeah. And so that kind of takes it outside of the not being quite sure within the religious framework if you go to like a Catholic church, or you know what I mean? The
Yeah.
church's representation of the story might be different than what actually happened because they wanna present it in a certain way, right? And so you're going back to the
Yeah,
original
yeah.
story. Yeah, yeah,
It's like angels today. Like anybody now can go online and see, biblically accurate angels and what they look like and so forth. And they're different, by the way. There's not just one
yeah,
form of them, but they definitely look different than artistic conventions of them, which paint
right.
them to be beautiful and draw on the artistic conventions of Greece. Where like you have you have
The cherubs and
Eros, the god. Yeah, yeah. You have, they look all beautiful and everything like that. But if you look at them in the Jewish and Christian traditions in their texts, they're a little bit scary.
they might even more resemble reports you hear from experiencers of who
Oh,
they
absolutely,
beings
they
that they've
do.
encountered.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's
they
that's a
do.
really fascinating thing to me.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. This is somebody is asking me, this is from our experiencers from just summer and I can't read this, and Dom Dude 10. I hope I'm saying that correctly. So the question is, in the Surviving Death Netflix series, Nicole DeHaas says the spirit would the spirit world will slowly develop you towards working with ectoplasm. Do you know more or have you heard any experiences about how the spirit world plays in the development of these abilities? Yeah, I mean, I touched on this a little bit earlier. I think it's a fascinating component of physical mediumship, and I think every physical medium develops differently with regards to whether they are working with ectoplasm or not. But any of the photographs that you see of this sort of white substance that all the skeptics say is cheesecloth, uh, you can see that there is this substance there, and when you freeze it, it's very living. It's a moving thing. So when you take a still photo of it, it does look weird. It looks like cheesecloth. But and I don't think there's any general way to describe it. There have been some remarkable physical mediums who didn't work with ectoplasm at all, and they had a lot of light in the room. Ectoplasm is very sensitive to light, which is one of the reasons why Stuart Alexander has a lot of the phenomena in his room take place in the dark, because ectoplasm doesn't work well with light. But famous physical mediums such as D.D. Hume, who is one of the most famous and accomplished mediums ever. His name is spelled Home. He was Scottish. Had phenomenal physical phenomena in his seances within the light that did not involve ectoplasm that anybody could see anyway. And he had lots of materializations of hands. Some of them sound sort of like ectoplasmic, but it's varies from medium to medium. Another really interesting study that people might be interested in who are interested in physical mediumship were the skull experiments, which took place in England in the late 90s. A series of experiments over a year or two by a group of 4 mediums that were studied rigorously by members of the Society for Psychical Research in London. Many scientific investigators were studying this group, and they had unbelievable phenomena going on, and none of it involved ectoplasm, as far as anybody knew. So there's no way to generalize. That's my point. I think different physical mediums work with it in whatever ways it evolves for them, and I don't think they can always predict what's going to evolve for them. But it is a very real thing, and it's very individual depending on who the medium is that is involved. That's why I would answer that one. Diana, I think we have to, just one announcement I'm supposed to make here that I just want to look on my phone for, that the link that I mentioned about for the interview with Stuart Alexander from the Archives of the Impossible that I did with him for the oral history is they will be sharing, the link will be shared on Reddit, and they're going to update the description in YouTube with the link. If it's not there now, the point is it will be there. So it's not up there yet. So Diana, thank you so much for coming on today for this fascinating conversation. I could listen to you talk for hours. I
Absolutely.
thank all the Reddit participants, and I'm really sorry for all the great questions that we didn't have time to get to. I mean, Diana and I got to read the questions. They were really smart and really insightful and really wonderful. And we just couldn't cover all of them. But I thank everyone for submitting the questions. And also, of course, the team behind the scenes, Charles and Andrea and so many others. I'm terrible at remembering names. But it takes a lot of people all on volunteer time to put these AMAs together. And I think they're really special because we can be so conversational in them. And I just thank everybody behind the scenes for making these things happen. And especially thank you, Diana, for coming on today. I really
Oh,
appreciate
my
it.
pleasure. My pleasure. And thank you to you, Leslie, and everybody. Thank you.